problems, worries, sadness? Are you seeking solutions?
Bible says,
Do not anxious about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Choose faith over fear.
Where is God in the midst of COVID-19? What is going to happen? Hello and welcome to Hope Spot on Shalom World. I'm your host, Robert Feduccia, joining you from Nashville, Tennessee in the United States. And Hope Spot is designed to give you hope and insight for living during this time of global pandemic. And today our topic is COVID-19 and the Missionary Church. And I can think of two no better guests than the ones that we have today. First, we have Mr. Aloysius John. He is the Secretary General of Caritas International. And Caritas International is a network of 162 Caritas agencies, and they are serving the poorest of the poor in 200 countries around the world. Mr. John, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And joining us from Australia is the National Director for Aid for the Church in Need, Mr. Bernard Toutounji, and he is a student of John Paul II's anthropology and theology, a true student of our blessed Holy Father, and he is also a speaker, writer, and commentator. Mr. Toutounji, thank you for joining us as well.
Thanks for having me, Robert.
So, Bernard, if I could begin with you, I'd like, if I could ask from a theological standpoint, could you define what we mean by missionary? Because what I find is that there are so many words that get used and get used commonly, but we don't have a real working definition of it. Would you be able to provide that from a theological Catholic standpoint?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if we think about missionary disciples, that phrase itself has become much used and promoted under Pope Francis. I think that for Pope Francis, it's almost a new evangelization that Pope John Paul spoke about. It's this need to leave the lounges, leave the churches almost, leave our comfort and move out. And if we look back to Christ, which is where we have to go with these things, he called us to be a missionary church. He didn't just come and say, here I am, worship me, and now I'm going to go back and, you'll be very happy. He called the apostles, the disciples, to move out, to baptize, and he warned them, things will be tough, you'll be persecuted, you'll find difficulty. But he called the church very much, and it's something the church can't escape, the need to mission, to get out, to preach. And the church can never risk becoming comfortable in herself. And when she does that, she finds that her message becomes weakened and unattractive to the world. It's a missionary church. It's a church that seeks to go beyond itself, that is really what speaks to people, and especially one that's needed today, speaking to people who really are very fearful in many places through COVID, but not just COVID, through day-to-day life. There's so many struggles and hurts and pains. We need to be missionary for ourselves and for our brothers and sisters.
And I know the Holy Father has warned us about being a self-referential church, and so that charge to move and to go out is certainly a very real call. So to both of your agencies, could I ask how you live that out? So first to you, Mr. Toutounji, how does Aid to the Church in Need, how do you live that out, live out a missionary spirit there?
Yeah, sure. Aid to the Church in Need is a pontifical, spiritual and pastoral foundation. So our work is not so much doing the good work that Mr. John does, sort of looking after the poorest of the poor. Our work, as we say, is keeping the faith alive. It's about giving bikes to priests so they can get to their people. It's about building or rebuilding churches. It's about sharing catechetical tools. It's about helping nuns to survive. Our work particularly has a mandate to grow the church and to sustain the pastoral nature of it. So for us, it's very evident the work we do in responding to Christ and calling to look after the church where the church cannot look after herself. I suppose that's the easiest way to say what we do at Aid to the Church in Need.
That's a good definition. That's very helpful. Over to you, Mr. John. Could you describe the work of Caritas International? What all are you involved with, and how does that contrast to Aid in the Church in Need?
Yeah. Thank you very much. The work of Caritas, as Bernard said, is one of the missions of the church. The mission of the church has three dimensions. One is the proclamation, the liturgy, and diaconia, which is the charitable work. So Caritas Internationalis is entrusted with the charitable work because it is living the gospel values in day-to-day life, in solidarity, in dialogue with the poor. So Caritas Internationalis, which is a confederation of 162 members, is working in three main areas. Number one is when there's an emergency, Caritas Internationalis is entrusted with the task of helping the people who are in need and saving lives. The second one is ensuring that there is development of the population, the poorest, so that they're able to have a sustainable development and they're able to live in dignity. And the third one is put in place structures in the local churches which are able to carry out this work of diaconia or charity or caritas in order to continue the work, and they become by themselves actors of solidarity. So this is what I would say in a resume, the work of Caritas. So Caritas is nothing but the prolongation of the word, the faith lived in the church in the day-to-day activities and day-to-day lives.
So, if I could ask this now. So, here we have this pandemic, and by very definition, pandemic is global. What kind of an impact is this having from a worldwide perspective? Mr. John, if I could go to you first
Yeah.
for that.
We met the Holy Father on the 27th of March, at the time when this was getting to be a major problem. The Holy Father said, this is a wake-up call, and this is going to bring about changes in the world. And he said, this should bring about conversion of attitude. So the pandemic today, as such, it has really created a major change in the whole world. First of all, it affected the countries which are rich, because in normal cases, it's the rich countries which go to help the poorest countries. And today, the poorest countries were not so affected in the beginning. It was the richest countries which were affected, and that created a kind of anomie, I would say, and also an atypical situation of emergency. Very soon, there was this. The situation started to go towards the south, and today, what is important is in the south, people through faith, first of all, and also through I would say, putting into action their traditional and cultural ways of living, they were able to protect themselves and also to be preparing themselves so that what's happening in the north may not happen in their countries. And this is where Caritas was in the front line. First of all, Caritas scaled up the activities, the ongoing activities, and secondly, different kinds of emergency activities were put up by the creation of a COVID-19 fund, which aimed at, first of all, giving the people the right information, the food for them. Some of them are from the very poorest communities, giving them food so that they may not go out to look for food. And thirdly, giving them also the basic necessities like hygiene material and other kinds of material in order to help them to live normally and not become victims of contagion by going out in the slums or in the streets, etc. So the work of Caritas was more at this time in the global south. It was to create more a conducive situation where we could prevent the propagation of the sickness. And this is where the local churches were in the forefront by giving them lots of information and also using the church, the ceremonies which were not taking place, but through the radios, giving people enough information so that they protect themselves. So these are some of the activities and the changes which COVID-19 brought about. In other words, COVID-19 really questioned our normal ways of working, responding to emergencies. It questioned our normal ways of dealing with emergency situation by saying A, B, C steps to be taken. It could not happen. So it was a very atypical emergency, and this is what Caritas has been striving to respond to.
So, Mr. Toutounji, we're seeing how this is a completely different kind of a crisis where the rich countries are affected, the poor countries are affected, but even the nature of what would be done, there's no hand-to-hand, face-to-face kind of charitable work happening. So how has this affected the church in need, the church around the world in their pastoral care? What's been happening? Could you give us a view into that?
Sure. For us, two of the major aspects that have come to the fore, and the other sort of aspects of work have been put to the side briefly, was the support of mostly religious women, sisters, and priests. So we arrange about 1.5 million mass offerings for poor priests a year. And that not only supports them, 10% of all priests supported by these mass offerings, but it supports essentially their Catholic community around them. It's what allows them to minister to their people and often their people to manage through whatever the situation is. So we've put a lot of work into supporting the priests so they can support their people and minister, most especially from our point of view, minister hope and minister the sacraments to their people. In regards religious sisters, we were told one story, a simple story of a religious congregation that made their income, their livelihood, by baking bread for the hosts, for the masses. And since there's no masses, they could not bake any bread, so therefore they had no income. So therefore they appealed to an agency like Aid to the Church in Need to assist them. So a lot of our support has gone to religious women, religious men, and also priests, because these people are, in many communities, the leaders of the community, especially in African nations and some Asian places. These are the people that stand out. So that's our support, has been to really support the church in those aspects.
And one of the things that I would like to bring up now is here we are at home. We know that, as we have said, that the wealthy countries have been impacted and not able to give. And also, though, at the same time, the church in the South, the poorer church, is in great need. So, understanding that, Mr. Toutounji, I want to go back to something that you had mentioned, that what new evangelization was to John Paul II, missionary discipleship is to Pope Francis. So, those of us who still are in the developing world, how can we live as missionary disciples right now during this time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for those in the developing world, those who in a sense have been gifted the faith already and for a long time in some parts of that world, the challenge for us now is to really live that out. And I think it really depends on what way the Lord places on your heart to respond to that. A very common way that many people see to do that is to go out, to another nation or to go to another land and support people that way. And that's a very legitimate way to do that if that's the way the Lord speaks. I suppose maybe I speak from my perspective. I see very much the need to be a missionary disciple in my own place, and maybe that relates to, I guess, the work at Aid to the Church in Need is to bring the church and bring hope and bring salvation to people who may not have heard that, and also to strengthen the faith of those who are already in the bowels of the church, to share and encourage and enlighten them and make them feel like, yes, they can really have the capacity to share their faith, to share their baptism. It's their call by nature of their very baptism to strengthen them and to encourage them to do that. So for me, it's really about evangelizing our people, because in doing that, they'll each be touched to go out and in very many different ways, which I certainly couldn't do, or any one of us here, go out and really reach out and meet the needs that are in our world.
Mm. Yeah, more disciples, larger church. That's amen, amen. So, Mr. John, how about for you? How would you answer that? How can we live here in the developed world, or whoever's listening? How can we live as missionary disciples right now?
Yeah. So thank you for this question. Today, in the present situation, the greatest temptation is withdrawal, becoming a bit selfish because we are completely lost in this whole pandemic. What Pope Francis told us was, at this time, as Christians, as faithful, you have to be witnesses of God's love for the poorest. It can be anybody. You have to be God's love for the poorest. And this is what he said, I'm asking you to do as Caritas. This is what I'm entrusting you to do as Caritas. Because he said this is a mission which we are all entrusted with, to serve the poor, to defend the poor, and to accompany the poor. And this is what which is needed at this time, to be in solidarity with them, by expressing God's love, the church's love for them. And that's the reason why he said, create something. And that's how we created the COVID-19 fund in order to fund symbolically certain number of projects. And today we have funded about 20 projects today, and there are still 14 projects to be funded. And these projects are small projects which go in the way of telling the local churches, we are with you. The universal church is with you, and together we are celebrating faith at this moment, because this is what is going to be a strength for us, and this is what which is going to guide us in this moment of darkness, where everything is dark, everything is gloomy, and there comes the ray of hope, that is faith. So this is how I would look at it also, being a missionary disciple. This is what it means for me. Also, personally, how do we become vectors of hope at a moment when everything is completely crumbling down and there seems to be walls everywhere and people are completely lost? And this is where it's important also for us to have faith in the people, in the poorest, because today the poorest we have to accompany them. That means we must be able to say, okay, we are ready to make the journey with you. That means believe in their capacity to be able to live in dignity. And this is what we're doing also today. And this is what I would see as the missionary discipleship.
If I can ask this, so you mentioned the COVID-19 fund. One, how could someone contribute to that? Could you give us some instruction, some direction on COVID-19 fund?
The COVID-19 fund has been used for in three key areas. Number one was awareness building, because with €100, $100, 2 or 3 villages could be made aware of what is COVID-19, and giving people information. Because one of the things is, when people are poor, they don't have the right to information. Nobody has given them any information, and even if they receive the information, it is not culture friendly, because the poor, they don't understand what it is. And this is where the first action is to give them the information. So, for example, for $100, we are able to attain 2, 3 villages where people go around, inform them, talk to them, and discuss with them. That is one area of action, the right to have the right information. The second area of action is, in this COVID-19 context, the poorest have even lost their means of livelihood. In India, for example, even the beggars can't go and beg today. There's nobody in the streets. So they are dying out of hunger. So the church is going out there. For example, in Madurai, in South India, the bishop himself went out to feed the beggars who were on the street, to help them, to give them a sign of hope, saying the church is with you. So give the hungry, feed the hungry. So this is what Caritas has been doing. That's the second action. The third action is to give the people the basic needs in terms of hygiene, good water, soap, and that could be also other kinds of material the people need to live on a day-to-day basis, because today they can't go to work. One of the problems of COVID-19 is most of the people who are doing daily menial jobs could not go and work. They lost their jobs. And they are, in a country like India, there are millions. In countries like Africa, there are also millions. And now in Latin America, where it is now spreading fast, it's also a major crisis. So this is where we had these three areas of intervention, which is nothing but giving them the basic needs, and giving them, behind this giving these basic needs, is giving them hope, and telling them there is somebody who's caring for you, and somebody who's ready to journey with you and in this difficult moment, and people are given this hope in order to live this moment in dignity. So these are the works we are doing. So €100 for doing this awareness building. For example, with €5, you can feed a family for 10 days. So there are different kinds of activities which are being done. And this is what the COVID-19 fund was meant for. Today, we have funded 20 projects in the 20 most needed countries. And there are still 14 projects which needs to be funded. We are trying to find means to fund them, especially in Latin America.
So COVID-19 fund, Caritas International. So aid for the church in need, Mr. Toutounji. Is there a comparable fund? Is there somewhere that we could go and make a contribution?
We don't have a COVID-19 fund, but I think to just keep it simple for your viewers, I would say to them, if they can do something, arrange a mass for a poor priest, whether that be for your own intentions or for the needs of the world. So we here in Australia began a bouquet of masses for the spiritual needs of the world during the time, and we've got now hundreds and hundreds, close to a few thousand masses arranged for the needs of the world for that spiritual aspect, but also because that goes directly to those priests. So, for example, I think it's 8 or 9 conversion to euro. That's the offering, a stipend that goes to that priest. The whole 100% we send to the priest. He's able to offer the mass the intentions of the donor, whatever that might be. And there he's able, traditionally, that's what a mass stipend is. It helps the priest to live through that day until the next day. So it's a gift of thanks for that mass. So I'd say to your donors, 10% of the world's priests are supported by mass stipends. Support a priest, arrange a mass, and bring grace to the world through that.
And so in the brief time that we have remaining, could you describe, because there is charity, and certainly we're making a solicitation for charity, but there's something deeper that the church asks us to, and that is solidarity. Mr. Toutounji, could you let us go? Could you lead us out with just a word of what solidarity is and how we can live that?
I mentioned in the beginning about the call of our baptism sending us out, and I think it is attached to that by fact of our baptism, whether or not we're serving those who are baptized or aren't baptized, we have an obligation on us to unite ourselves. Just as if your brother or sister had fallen in the street or was in some particular need, spiritual, moral, financial, we would assist them. This solidarity is not just giving money to someone. It always sounds wrong to sort of say, just send us a few dollars, but it's really feel for these people, pray for these people, be sincere about their needs and think about your own blessings. So yes, it's money in one sense, but it's much more. We don't want your money as much as we want you to journey with the people who need your support as their brothers and sisters in Christ.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Recognizing that there's a mutuality that brothers and sisters, and not to have a sense of well, I have all this, and I now have to help out those who are below me. It's a mutuality that. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Well, I am grateful, Mr. Toutounji, for you being with us today. Mr. Toutounji from the Aid to the Church in Need. Thank you.
Thanks for having us. It's been a pleasure.
And also Mr. Aloysius John, the Executive Director, Secretary General for Caritas International. It has been an honor to have you, and God's blessings on you and your work.
Thank you very much.
And as you just saw, there is a very real need, how the pandemic has impacted both the rich nations and the poorer nations. We are all in this together, truly. What we are able to give, let's please give. Let us give of our spiritual wealth. Let us give of our material wealth as well. And I may add, to give out of our own need is itself a grace, and it is, in fact, an act of faith. So if you have enjoyed this content, please come to shalomworld.org. Also download our app where there is much more for you. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time right here at Hope Spot on Shalom World.
To all of the viewers of Shalom TV throughout the world, I want to encourage you not only to support this amazing media apostolate, but to spread the word to others. We all know how the internet and mass media are polluting the world with the poison of pornography and so much other forms of materialism. This is the source of eternal life, the gospel, and Shalom TV is consecrated to spreading the word of Christ. Thank you.